Let's end this marriage. I can't take this life that's all about the kids anymore, Richard declared, making it clear he felt I had changed since we got married. He expressed unhappiness, but changing roles from a lover to a spouse and then to a parent is a natural progression. You're going to regret this, he said with a certain glee, likely imagining scenarios that favored him. I looked at him, feeling distant and cold. My name is Carolyn, 29 years old. I've been married to Richard for 4 years and we have a child together. But happiness seems to be elusive in our household. Richard hardly participates in child rearing or household tasks. I'm on maternity leave, juggling the responsibilities of our home and our child by myself. My leave is drawing to a close, and I'm worried about how I'll manage once I return to work in 5 months. Despite my pleas for Richard to help more with our child and the chores, he remains indifferent, acting as if these duties are solely mine. This apathy has left me feeling overwhelmed and anxious about our future together. Richard and I met at work, ending up in the same department after I transferred. He was my supervisor, only 4 years my senior, but I admired his confidence and leadership. We fell for each other and eventually got married, but marriage revealed a side of Richard I hadn't seen while we were dating. The qualities I once admired now frustrate me. He became more self-centered, neglecting the thoughtful gestures he used to show me when we were dating. Living together has only magnified these issues, making me wish we had lived together before marrying. I hoped we could solve our problems through communication, but that was overly optimistic. Growing up, I believed marriage was about mutual support, a belief reinforced by my family. However, Richard's reluctance to share household responsibilities, despite initially agreeing to, has been disheartening. He started to neglect his duties, making excuses and asserting that as the breadwinner, his job exhaustion justified his lack of involvement at home. This situation has pushed me to a breaking point. Marriage, I thought, was about partnership and shared responsibilities, but my reality with Richard feels far from it. Richard started to make it clear that he saw household chores as solely the woman's responsibility, even though I also worked. His priorities shifted more towards spending time with friends or indulging in his hobbies, often leaving me behind. I had hoped that having a child together might bring about some changes in him. However, even during my pregnancy, when morning sickness left me barely able to move, Richard showed little empathy. He would complain about the house not being tidy, dismissing my illness as an act of laziness, and would leave to eat out because I hadn't prepared anything. His detachment went as far as not visiting me in the hospital during childbirth, choosing a drinking party over being with me. When I returned home after a 4-day hospital stay, he criticized me for making a big deal out of childbirth and warned me not to neglect the housework. Trying to comprehend his lack of compassion was baffling. It seemed his comfort was more important to him than our well-being. My disappointment in Richard grew, especially after he focused more on complaining about our child's birth than celebrating it. Throughout my maternity leave, I cared for our baby alone, with Richard showing no interest in being a father. When I asked him to engage more with our child, his response was dismissive, prioritizing his relaxation over our needs. He even resorted to using earplugs to ignore our crying baby, choosing gaming or reading instead. Richard's insistence on perfect housekeeping and his view that childcare was my sole duty showed a clear lack of responsibility and awareness as a partner and a father. Despite my exhaustion and the visible toll it took on me, Richard remained indifferent, often saying he needed to escape our home to relax. The last time I felt as carefree as Richard seemed to be daily was probably during our honeymoon. Despite being a married man and a father, he acted as if he was still single, criticizing my appearance and neglecting his health and well-being responsibilities towards me, a stark contrast to the considerate and kind person I dated. Frustrated and overwhelmed by his refusal to contribute to our household, I found myself too exhausted to even express my anger properly. If he believed things should be different, I wished he would show it by helping more with our shared responsibilities. I responded with a tired voice, but Richard just pointed fingers at me, claiming I was the problem. During our dating days, I thought he was amazing, but I never expected him to reveal such selfishness after marriage. Despite everything, I still hoped Richard would step up and be the father he should be. I tried to guide him, but it was disheartening to see his persistent refusal to change. Then, on his day off, Richard announced he'd be out with friends, expecting dinner upon his return. completely ignoring how worn out I was. If you expect that, then you should contribute around the house. Don't make me repeat myself. It's exhausting, I said. But no matter how much I explained the constant demands of childcare, his response was always, "Don't be spoiled. You're on maternity leave." Resigned to yet another challenging day, I juggled childcare and housework. That evening, after I finally got our child to sleep and allowed myself a moment of rest, Richard came home. I was half asleep, drained from endless nights and the toll of looking after our child when Richard's loud complaint about dinner not being ready jolted me awake. His indignation, coming after a day of leisure for him, filled me with anger, yet I was too tired to argue. My primary concern was that his shouting would wake our baby. "Keep it down, please. The baby's just fallen asleep," I whispered. But my plea didn't calm him. Instead, it infuriated him more. "You've changed since we got married. Are you mocking me?" Richard accused, upset that I was putting our child's needs above his. To me, the priority was clear. We were parents now. Richard, however, seemed stuck in his premarital ways, not fully committing to his role as a father. "Of course, I'll prioritize our child. They are your child too. Why don't you show more interest?" I countered, frustration mounting. His next words shocked me. "Divorce me then. I'm tired of this life revolving around the child." Without a second thought, I agreed, exhausted from a marriage that brought more blame than support. Richard appeared satisfied with my agreement, as if the divorce would unfold in his favor. "Then leave my house quickly," he smirked, likely thinking I'd be at a loss or plead with him to stay. He couldn't have been more wrong. Convinced that Richard would one day regret our divorce, I quickly gathered my things and left our home quietly, seeking peace away from the turmoil. Just 4 days after my departure, I found a surprising sense of relief living without Richard. While taking care of our child remained challenging, the absence of Richard's stressful presence was a welcome change. During this peaceful time, Richard reached out to me in a state of panic. "You've created a huge mess here. Take responsibility," he demanded over the phone. I responded with calmness, which only fueled his frustration further. Richard then revealed that his life had spiraled out of control since I left. He admitted to having an affair with his high school ex-girlfriend, Hannah, who also worked at our company. The affair had been discovered, causing a scandal among our colleagues. As a result, Richard's professional life was in turmoil. Hannah had ended their relationship, and to add to the drama, Hannah's husband was threatening to sue for alimony. Hannah, in an attempt to avoid financial responsibility, blamed the entire situation on Richard and portrayed herself as the victim. Richard, consumed by anger and confusion, unjustly blamed me for the fallout of his actions. Hearing Richard's outburst, I was more astonished than angry. I had been aware of Hannah, Richard's ex-girlfriend, since our dating days, although we worked in different departments and had never personally interacted. Richard had occasionally mentioned Hannah, surprised by their reunion at the company. Unbeknownst to Richard, I had been aware of his affair with Hannah from the start, thanks to Jacob, Hannah's husband and my longtime friend. Jacob and I had known each other since elementary school and reconnected in college, maintaining a close friendship ever since. When Jacob informed me of his marriage to Hannah, I had shared the news with Richard, who seemed disinterested at the time. It wasn't until I was struggling with the demands of solo parenting that Jacob reached out to me again. He called, sensing something was amiss in my life, and after hearing about my struggles with Richard and our child, Jacob reluctantly disclosed the affair between Richard and Hannah. This revelation, while shocking, was delivered at a time when my marriage to Richard was already fraught with difficulties, making the impact of the news less about the betrayal and more about the irony of the situation. Richard's attempt to place the blame on me for his indiscretions and the chaos that followed was both misguided and revealing. It highlighted not only his inability to take responsibility for his actions, but also the depth of his delusion in thinking I would be affected by his affair in the way he had anticipated. When Jacob revealed to me that Richard, my husband, was having an affair with his wife, Hannah, I wasn't as shocked as one might expect. Instead, there was a sense of clarity. Given Richard's disinterest in our family and his neglect, the news of his infidelity didn't come as a surprise. It felt like a confirmation of my doubts about his commitment to our marriage. "That does make sense," I responded to Jacob, feeling a strange calmness about the revelation. I appreciated Jacob's courage in sharing this with me, and it shifted my perspective on my marriage with Richard. His infidelity made it clear that I wasn't obligated to fix our broken relationship. Jacob sought my help to gather evidence of the affair, aiming to confront Richard and Hannah with undeniable proof. Despite my willingness to assist, I was concerned about my ability to contribute much while caring for our baby and managing the household. Jacob reassured me, suggesting I share any patterns or behaviors of Richard that could aid their investigation. We agreed to share the costs of hiring a professional to gather the evidence, and I committed to keeping Jacob informed about Richard's activities. When Richard later admitted to his affair in a moment of panic, I couldn't help but think he was reaping the consequences of his actions. I calmly informed him that he, too, would be facing demands for alimony, not just from his mistress's husband, but from me as well. Richard attempted to deny the affair, claiming it was all just suspicion. However, when I mentioned we had evidence, his panic was palpable. He hadn't realized that our conversation wasn't recorded, but his defensive and accusatory response afterward revealed his true character. Richard tried to shift the blame onto me, arguing that I was burdening him with childcare and household responsibilities, despite his work fatigue. This attempt to portray me as the one at fault was a clear sign of his unsuitability for marriage and partnership. His insistence that the marriage's failures were my doing, and his audacious demand for alimony from me, only further illuminated his inability to take responsibility for his actions. Reflecting on Richard's behavior and his outright refusal to support our family emotionally or physically, I realized that his views on marriage and responsibility were fundamentally flawed. His accusations and demands for alimony, despite his infidelity and neglect, were the final straw, confirming that my decision to end our marriage was not only right but necessary. Eager to finalize the divorce and end the constant bickering with Richard, I asked him to send the divorce papers as soon as they were ready. I wanted everything in order to proceed with the divorce without delay, although I wasn't in a rush to sort out the alimony. Richard's reaction to my request was one of confusion, especially when I told him I was staying at my parents' house with our baby. It seemed the most logical choice to me, but Richard was infuriated by the idea, likely fearing the damage to his reputation, already tarnished by his workplace affair. His concerns seemed to revolve more around how the divorce would look to others than the actual end of our marriage. "If you've done nothing wrong, there's nothing to worry about, right?" I challenged him, exasperated by his focus on appearances rather than our real issues. To avoid further unilateral decisions and to ensure a clear and fair process, I suggested we discuss the divorce in the presence of both our families, hoping to prevent any future disputes or misrepresentations of the situation. Richard was resistant, unsurprisingly, but I was firm, especially since I had evidence of his affair and was determined to seek alimony and child support. His refusal to acknowledge his financial responsibilities towards our child and his outright denial of wrongdoing only solidified my decision. He even claimed he wouldn't pay a dime, accusing me of seeking child support as a means to live off him comfortably. The day we were to discuss the divorce with our parents, I left our child with my sister and headed to my in-laws' house, anticipating that Richard might try to cast himself as the victim to his family. Prepared to counter any of his lies with the truth, I was ready for the meeting. As expected, Richard began with a tale of woe, portraying himself as the aggrieved party, overwhelmed by childcare and household responsibilities, and even accusing me of infidelity. His audacity was almost impressive, considering it was he who had neglected our family, prioritizing his leisure over our needs. His attempt to play the victim in front of our families was a bold move, but I was prepared to reveal the truth, confident that the evidence and facts would speak louder than Richard's fabrications. As Richard spun his narrative, painting himself as an overwhelmed victim buried under childcare and housework, my father looked on, puzzled and concerned. Richard seized this moment to cast doubt on my character, suggesting I was the one at fault for not supporting him. His words twisted the reality of our daily struggles, where it was actually Richard who often complained and shirked his responsibilities. I chose to stay quiet as he made his case, letting the tension in the room build. When the moment felt right, I decided it was time to reveal the truth. I pulled out a voice recorder, asking everyone to listen carefully. The recording clearly captured Richard's harsh words towards me when I sought his help, and his assertions that childcare and housework were solely my duties as a woman. Richard's panic was evident as he tried to stop the playback, but my in-laws intervened, holding him back. Next, I presented photographic evidence of Richard's infidelity, showing him and Hannah together, in compromising situations. Richard's immediate reaction was to question how I obtained the photos, inadvertently confirming their authenticity. "So, you admit to the affair?" I countered, catching him off guard as he scrambled for excuses, claiming the photos were fabricated to fit my narrative. Despite his parents' disapproval, Richard stubbornly denied any wrongdoing, clinging to his denial. Frustrated by his continued lies, I played another recording. This one featured conversation between Richard and Hannah, where they belittled me and Jacob and discussed their future plans together. It was clear from their words that they had little regard for their current spouses. This second recording seemed to solidify my in-laws' understanding of the situation. They had been quietly observing, likely piecing together the truth from the evidence presented. Even as Richard's parents admonished him, he persisted with his excuses, unwilling to concede any fault. It was evident that my decision to bring these recordings and photos was justified, as they painted a clear picture of the deceit and lack of respect at the heart of Richard's actions. As the reality of Richard and Hannah's disregard for their marriages came to light, it underscored the deceit and selfishness that had led to the dissolution of our relationship. In the midst of our heated discussion, Richard, with a laugh that carried a mocking tone, declared regretfully, "I should never have married her." This statement, made in front of both our families, drew sharp looks of disdain from our parents. My father-in-law, a police officer known for his physical presence and zero tolerance for dishonesty, fixed Richard with a stare that made him visibly shrink. His profession had instilled in him a deep contempt for deceit, and in this moment, his fury was unmistakable. Feeling cornered by my father-in-law's intimidating aura, Richard turned to me in desperation, seeking an ally. "I understand I was wrong. I won't make you carry all the burden of childcare and housework anymore, and I'll stop my affair. Please, can we start over?" he pleaded, hoping for forgiveness and a chance to reset our relationship. But his words, though seemingly sincere, fell on my disbelieving ears. I had heard similar promises before, only to be met with repeated disappointments. I took a deep breath and addressed Richard. "You've often accused me of changing since our marriage, but becoming parents naturally shifts our priorities towards our child. It's been tough managing everything alone without your support." My words were calm but firm, highlighting the unfeasibility of continuing a life with someone who failed to embrace their parental duties. Richard, tears welling up in his eyes, repeated his vow to change. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized that any forgiveness on my part would only invite a cycle of the same mistakes. Despite his current show of remorse, his history of neglect and blame left me with no trust in his promises. "Let's get a divorce," I said clearly, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil within. Richard's shock was evident. He had not anticipated my resolve. He protested, "Why? I still love you. I won't agree to a divorce." However, the consensus among our families was clear. They could not condone his actions, especially after witnessing firsthand how he had hurt our family. My parents, who had successfully balanced their careers and shared household responsibilities, were particularly appalled by Richard's behavior. Despite my initial request for them not to intervene, they couldn't hold back their condemnation upon hearing the conversation, which I had put on speakerphone. Their disappointment was palpable, not just in Richard's refusal to acknowledge his faults, but in the hurt he had caused. They assured him that he had lost any trust or respect from us, declaring, "After hurting our family this way, we cannot forgive you. We will not entrust our daughter to someone who fails to protect and care for her." Under my mother-in-law's quiet guidance, we left their house, closing a painful chapter and beginning the process of moving forward, away from the turmoil that had overshadowed our lives. "I'm truly sorry for everything you've been through because of Carolyn," my mother-in-law expressed, her voice laden with genuine remorse. Having devoted her life to homemaking, she felt complicit in perpetuating the belief that household duties should fall exclusively on a woman's shoulders, a sentiment she now regretted. However, I understood that the issue lay with Richard's behavior, not with the values my in-laws may have inadvertently supported. "You've always shown me kindness and support. Please don't blame yourself," I comforted her, emphasizing that I bore no resentment towards them for Richard's actions. With a heavy heart, I left their home, determined to close this chapter of my life. Through legal means, I pursued compensation from Richard and Hannah, bolstered by irrefutable evidence of their affair. The settlement was significant, and despite Richard's initial resistance, his parents' stance ensured that both the compensation and the mandated child support were duly paid. Their unethical behavior extended beyond their personal lives. They were found to have misused company resources to facilitate their affair. Their indiscretions, captured on the company's surveillance systems, led to their termination from employment. With Richard losing his job and company housing, and Hannah facing similar consequences, they found themselves isolated, unable to turn to their families for support. Now, Richard struggles to cover his living expenses, compensation, and child support, a stark contrast to his previous life. Hannah's situation mirrors his, as she too faces the repercussions of their actions. It seems a fitting outcome for three individuals who exploited their positions and relationships without regard for others. As for myself, with the unwavering support of my parents, I'm navigating the challenges of single parenthood with renewed strength. The burdens that once overwhelmed me have lessened, allowing me to focus on my well-being and that of my child. The sleepless nights and stress-induced dark circles are now a thing of the past. Jacob, too, has found solace in the aftermath of our respective divorces. Reflecting on my initial impressions of Richard, I acknowledge his confidence masked a deeper selfishness. This experience, though painful, has been a lesson in judgment and resilience. My primary focus now is to ensure our child grows up in a nurturing environment, surrounded by love and happiness.